Welcome to the Simple Doesn't Mean Easy podcast. We are here once a week working at simplifying things in our lives, one day at a time, one simple step at a time. I'm your host, Michelle Visser, and today we're talking about a lot of things to do with the garden. It is still very cold. We probably have about 6 inches of snow covering the ground currently. It is January as I'm recording this. But all gardeners know it is definitely time to be thinking about and planning your garden. So I think I'm going to probably have quite a few episodes in the weeks ahead related to gardening, something I love talking about, something I love doing. So today's episode, we're going to break down some questions that your seed company might not want you to ask. We're going to talk about how to decide the best plants to grow, especially if you have a limited space, which let's face it, we all have limited space in some way. And finally, we're going to talk about three things that I never even thought about growing in my garden that now I can't imagine gardening without. So it's going to be a good episode. I'm glad you're here. Also, I put together a totally free resource for you that is going to help you up level your gardening this year. Whether you are an expert gardener, been doing it all your life, or brand new at it, this is a resource that's going to help you and be valuable to you. Go to solelyrested.com/seeds. SOULY rested.com/SEEDS. That will include a lot of the stuff that we're talking about today, and it will go into more detail. And it also covers a lot more things that we're not getting into today. But it's a resource that will be helpful to you. And I think it's going to be a nice summary, like I said, of this episode with more information to boot. So go to solelyrested.com/seeds and grab that free resource. Before we dive into this episode, I want to talk about meat for a second. Did you know that unless you personally know your rancher or your farmer who is raising the meat that you're eating, it most likely came here on a large barge from who knows where across the ocean. And it was repackaged in some way here in the US so it could be labeled as a product of the US. And if you're paying for the really best cuts because they have some fancy label on them, most likely you are being greenwashed because these terms don't mean a darn thing. Even if you do find a local farmer, you might not know. In fact, they might not know if their animal feed is being sprayed with glyphosate before it gets to their farm. Go to 99counties.com because there I have a great solution for you. It's a new platform that is connecting consumers like us who genuinely care about our food directly to regenerative farmers across the Midwest who are doing things right. Use code SOLELYRESTED at 99counties.com and take $30 off your first order. Isn't that great? Or go to solelyrested.com/beef. I link to everything there and I share with you some tips and insights and delicious recipes for preparing pasture raised meat. solelyrested.com/beef. BEEF. So for this episode, let's start with talking about how you decide the best plants to grow, especially if you have limited space. I mean, I have lots of space. We actually live on 14 acres, but don't think I could have 14 acres of garden because it is a whole lot of trees. We are sugar makers and it is a sugar bush that we live on. And on top of that, it's very uphill, which turns out to be great for a sugar maker because you have gravity feeding your lines, but it is not great for a gardener. Um, on top of that, we're in the granite state and there are tons of giant rocks. They're really quite cool, littering our property. So it's not really a gardener's heyday kind of property, but we definitely have a few large areas that I have been able to clear, put some fences, put in some gardens, and I love them, but I always want more. I'm limited in the sense that if I had unlimited space, there are so many things I would want to either try or to grow on an annual basis. Even here in New England, where we're limited, with our short growing season and our temperatures, we're limited what we can grow, but there still would be so many more things I would try if I had more garden space. So, all of that to say, never think if I just had a little bit more, I'd have enough, because that's really not how it works with gardening. And all of us really do have to plan our space well to really get the amount of food that we're hoping to get. So, I would recommend to think about the yield that your plant produces. If you're thinking about something like a tomato, which is probably one of my favorite things I grow. I think I grew 92 tomato plants last year, something in the 90s, and I'm hoping that I have even more this year. So, I love growing tomato plants. And one thing I love about them is from one single seed, you get a very large plant. And from that one plant, you will harvest dozens upon dozens of wonderful tomatoes. If you're talking cherry tomatoes, you're going to be harvesting hundreds from that plant. Um, but if you compare that to something like a beet or an onion, they take up a set amount of space in your garden, but you're literally getting one beet, one onion, right? So it's a very different amount of yield for the amount of space that they take up. I'm not saying you should never grow beets or onions. It's just think about, okay, how much space will this take up and how badly do I want it for the amount of yield it's going to give me? Also, think about if it's something that you can grow vertically. It might not typically be grown vertically, but you might be able to do that with it. I've seen people do that really successfully with different gourds. Even watermelons and cantaloupe, if you put a net around each one and securely attach it to your trellis that it's growing on. Never done that. I've just seen it being done. But I really like climbing beans, peas, and cucumbers for trellising. I also trellis my tomatoes, but that's not really to save me space. That's really to control the fungus, to let the air flow through them, and to be able to actually see and pick my tomatoes from what could be a huge bush of a mess if I wasn't trellising them and keeping them under control. But for green beans, I will grow bush beans and climbing beans. And I do that for a couple of reasons. But I'm just going to stick to talking about the climbing beans, that you can get a whole lot of beans. I mean, I don't even know how many quarts from one small area of what I call a wall. It's not really a wall, a trellis that we put up. And it's just taking up, I don't know, 6 inches by 6 feet. But it produces beans all summer long and so many quarts and quarts and quarts of them. I last summer actually dehydrated everything that we didn't eat fresh. And I think I dehydrated 3 quarts, but dehydrated green beans are teeny tiny. So I think one dehydrated quart probably equals about 6 regular quarts, maybe. I might be underestimating that, but that's all from one very small, like I said, area in my garden. So it has a big bang for its buck. And peas will also grow upright. They don't grow as tall. Even the giant, I don't know what they're called, but I got peas one year that were specifically like giant vines because I thought I would get more peas from it, but I don't really feel like I did, honestly. But they don't grow as tall as your green beans, so you're not going to get quite as much yield from your peas as you do your beans, at least in my experience. But cucumbers, my father always grew in mounds, and that's typically the way that people grow them. It's the way I was taught to grow them. But when I started trying to design my own gardens, and after a few years of having my mounds of cucumbers, and then just being kind of unruly and in my way. I would still trellis them, but because they were in a mound system, it just wasn't a good setup. I just wasn't happy with it. I decided one year I'm going to try and trellis them and see what happens. And it worked beautifully, and I've done it ever since. I know there are reasons for the mounds, and they're good reasons, but if you have good soil, maybe we should do an episode just about soil, um, and if they are being well watered, and there's good drainage and all of that, trellis system is great for cucumbers, and it's allowed me to grow so many more cucumbers in a much smaller space. And I really just like the way that it helps me contain the cucumbers better, and they look nice and orderly too. For me, the appearance of my garden matters too, and it just makes me super happy to spend hours and hours a day in it when everything's tidy and has its place. So trellising the cucumbers works really nicely for that. So those are just a few examples that I have come to terms with of plants that are going to produce a high yield in a limited amount of space. So hopefully that will get you thinking about that. Now, what about the questions that you ask of your seed company? There's still plenty of time to buy seeds, especially all those seeds that we're going to plant in the ground. I think I'll talk about that in an upcoming episode too, how you decide which ones you are going to start indoors and which ones should wait until outdoors. Um, we will be starting our indoor seedlings. Probably it's typically around the third to fourth week of February that I start doing that. And then I wind up not finishing. It's kind of quite a process. I mean, when you're planting 92 tomatoes along with all the other stuff, there's a lot to plant, right? Um, Tends to go almost until end of March before I have all my seedlings planted. But that gives me um, at least 6 weeks for the seedlings to be developed before they go in the ground. Better to have 8 weeks. 8 to 10 weeks is ideal. So anyway, there's still time to get your seeds, is what I'm saying. So if you are ordering seeds and you're not sure where to go, for one thing, of course, you need to have a company that's providing the kind of seeds that you want. But if you have a company that has a great variety, they are going to have things that you wouldn't have thought to even look for elsewhere. So I love that about Territorial Seeds. If you go to territorialseeds.com/simple, SIMPLE, that is the page they have set up for the Simple Doesn't Mean Easy listeners with a special code there. So if you want to go try out their seeds, definitely go to territorialseeds.com/simple. But um, I was surprised when I started shopping for my seeds there at the variety they had, that it's some things I have found nowhere else. I also like that they have plants. That's another question you could ask of your seed company, actually, that I hadn't thought of, is do they also provide some things in plant form? Because there's great advantage to that depending on what it is you're looking for. So one thing to ask is, where do they source their seeds? Obviously, the closer to home they can source them, the better, and the more control they have over the environment where the seeds are being grown, the better. And do they test every variety of seed themselves? I think a lot of companies don't do that. It's very time consuming and takes up a lot of space. But it's wonderful if they do, because then they're not selling things that aren't going to produce well. They're testing the viability of the seeds before they even ship them out to you. And finally, what are their germination rates? That's so important to me here in our short growing season. If I am going to be planting something like my bush beans in the ground and a whole row doesn't come up, or a whole section, or even just a polka dotted variety here and there that doesn't come up, it's usually too late. When I realize they're not coming up, it's usually too late in my season for me to plant new seeds there. So germination rate is super important to me, and a great company is going to have a really high germination rate. So you're not going to have that wasted time, and you're going to get more food from your efforts. So when I asked these questions of Territorial Seed, let's see, what do I have here? They were super particular with their seed suppliers. I was really impressed with how they go about vetting their seed suppliers. And I thought it was cool that they have a 75-acre test farm, and they test every single variety of seed that they sell. And then they only sell the ones that actually produce well on their farm. And their seed germination standards are actually higher than the industry standard. So that was a good thing to hear. And they have no GMO varieties. They only want to support agricultural processes that are leading to healthy soil and good ecosystems. So they just don't even bother with GMO seeds. So those are the things to think about If you're debating about your seed company, maybe reach out to them or maybe look around on their website and see if you can get those questions answered. Or, like I said, go to the company that I have vetted and I am loving everything I'm learning about them and eager to um, try even different and new seeds this year that I haven't tried before because I found them there. In fact, that's going to be another episode too, telling you all about a new garden that I'm planning that I'm super excited about. I want to pause this episode and tell you to go to solelyrested.com/seeds, SEEDS. If you are going to plant any food this year, if you're looking for seeds, if you need live plants, if you need any sort of gardening items, you want to go to solelyrested.com/seeds and check out my new favorite seed company. I want you to take advantage of the special offer, the special savings that you can enjoy on any purchase that you would like to make there. These seeds are amazing. This company is super particular with what seed suppliers they work with. They have a 75-acre farm where they test every single variety of seed before they make it available. And their seed germination standards are way higher than industry standards. On top of that, you won't find GMO seeds at all from this company because they don't just talk about doing the right thing, about leading to healthy soil and good ecosystems, but they do the right things and they refuse to sell GMO seeds. Go to solelyrested.com/seeds, enjoy the savings, and check this out. solelyrested.com/SEEDS. Also, let's talk about tea for a second. If you've been following me for any length of time, you know that I absolutely love making my own tea blends for a whole lot of reasons. But the truth is, I don't grow my own tea plant. And even though I grow a lot of herbs and other things to add to my tea blends, I don't grow things like Assam and Nilgiri and rooibos. In fact, rooibos only grows in one part of the world, one specific part of South Africa. Anyway, my point is, I couldn't make tea blends without Positively Tea. And if you want to go check out my favorite blends, go to solelyrested.com/teas, TEAS. I also have a special savings code waiting for you there. And this company, I can't tell you enough how much I love everything about this company. I'm so thankful that they're sponsors of this podcast. So please go give them some love. And by the way, I have 3 tea blends right at the top of that page right now that I think is what has kept me healthy all winter. I'm enjoying these 3 blends. They've been boosting my immunity and they're absolutely delicious. Seriously, go check it out. Solely Rested, SOULY rested.com/TEAS. Moving on. There are 3 things that I want to tell you that I never thought of growing in my garden before. And I'm so thankful that I did. In fact, you know what? That's something else I should tell you too. When you're planting your garden this year, I highly recommend, like strongly recommend, even though, we were talking about you have limited space and you want to grow the most food you can, every single year, I recommend you grow something you've never grown before. I mean, first of all, let's face it, our time here on earth is limited. We only have so many summers. So, why not try something new that you might absolutely fall in love with? And that's been the case for me with a few of these things. So, I strongly encourage that to try something new. If you're not sure what to try new, then, listen in to upcoming podcast episodes and what I'm going to tell you right now and talk to friends and gardeners and get some ideas of what you might want to try. In fact, last fall, we had stopped at a really cute nursery and I was talking to the owner. It was a multi-generational farm and his grandfather was doing the same thing he's doing and he could tell he loved what he was doing. And we were talking about tomatoes and his greenhouses and I could have stayed and talked for hours. But the reason he just popped into my head was that's where I heard about a tomato that I've never grown before. And he was telling me how it's the most popular one, that his customers absolutely love it and ask for it again and again. He has restaurants coming from all across the state that purchase his tomatoes in like a weekly amount or whatever. And this is like the number one pick for most of them because it's so sweet, So I added it to my list. So, I mean, it's things like that that get me really excited. And if I hadn't have stopped and talked to him, I might have never discovered this tomato. So definitely think of something, if it's just one thing that you want to try this year. Last year, I think I had a couple new things, but ashwagandha was a new one for me. And that was just because I saw it at my favorite nursery. I was looking around for different varieties of mint plants that I wanted to try. And I looked over and I thought, that can't say ashwagandha. Does that say ashwagandha? And I'm reading it and I'm going, oh my word. Well, the owner of this nursery would not be selling this if it couldn't grow in our climate, I'm sure. And I even talked to them when I went to buy it. And they're like, oh, well, I mean, yeah, it should do well for you. So that was one of my new things last year, and I was so excited about that. It did so well. I actually had 2 plants. It was that great 2 for 1 thing where you're buying your pot and you choose the one that not only looks the healthiest, the leaves are the most vibrant, but ooh, it has 2 plants down in there instead of 1. So I actually got 2 ashwagandha plants, and the roots did fabulously well. You harvest ashwagandha for the roots, and I dehydrated them and I roasted them, and I actually have not I haven't I did dehydrate. I have not yet diced it up or powdered it. I just have my roasted roots sitting around right now. It's always so many things like that that I think this winter I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, all these things, and then winter gets busy, and here winter's starting to come to an end, and I haven't done a lot of things. I have a lot of unprocessed pork fat that I haven't turned into lard yet in my freezers in my barn. I have my ashwagandha root that I haven't yet turned into a powder. So lots of stuff. But that was a big rabbit trail to tell you, definitely plant something you haven't planted before. For me, it was probably 6 years ago now that asparagus was one of those things. And I can't tell you enough. If you came to me and you said, "Okay, Michelle, I'm going to start a garden. I don't know what to start with, but I can only plant one thing." First of all, I'd be like, "No, no, please try and plant more." But if you really could just plant one thing, I think I might tell you to plant asparagus. Especially, maybe my first question to you would be, okay, where you're living now, do you think you'll be there for a while? Do you see yourself staying there for a decade or two? Or is this like an apartment where you're going to be moving on? Because that matters a whole lot. But if it is a place where you're going to be for at least 4 or 5 years, I think I would tell you asparagus. It's fabulous. And I love that it is such an early producing crop. It is giving me food at least 5, 6 weeks before anything else in my garden is producing food. And it's just so exciting to go out there and harvest asparagus when the rest of the garden is still barren. And the asparagus, it does so well. It's really resistant to any problems. I've never had any pest problems with it whatsoever. And it's delicious. Young, fresh asparagus, broken off, brought in and cooked for dinner that night is so good. You also can stick it down in a glass of water and keep it for days. You can stick it in the fridge that way and keep it for a week or two. But fresh, so good, especially if you pick it young. And it comes back year after year. It requires no effort. If you don't know the taste of it, I just realized some people might not. I hadn't had a lot of asparagus actually until I planted it. I'd had it here and there, but not much. It's just not a typical vegetable that I would buy at the farmer's market or the store. But if you like broccoli and green beans, you will absolutely love asparagus. It's kind of similar to both of those, kind of a cross almost between them. That's just my opinion. I haven't read this or gotten any professional opinions on it. So let me know if you disagree with me, but that's kind of what I think it tastes like. And it's so easy to cook. You just stir fry it in the skillet is usually what I do. Anyway, the other thing that I just planted last year, and I didn't consider this as a new to me thing because I've been growing broccoli for many years, long time, but it was purple broccoli. And I had never tried this variety. And that's the other thing I would recommend to you. If you've been gardening for a little while and you're planting your seeds, and you know that you love a certain thing to grow it, maybe try a different variety and add that in. Keep the varieties you love, but find an extra corner that you can plant a new variety of whatever it is you love growing, whether it's peppers or tomatoes. But for broccoli, I had the worst trouble growing them from seed. Never been able to do it. I had tried again and again. And some years I thought, oh, maybe these are going to get tall enough to actually be seedlings, but no. And then I'd always have to come mid-May, go out and buy my broccoli starts, which always infuriated me because every time I had tried to grow them and it wasn't working. I finally gave up after quite a few years of that. I don't know why broccoli is so hard to grow from seed, but this purple broccoli, this strand, this variety of broccoli is so easy to grow from seed. The seedlings are so hardy and healthy. They're super stocky and they hardened off really well. And the broccoli itself, I mean, I would say it's delicious, but I mean, it tastes like all the other broccoli varieties I've ever grown. I don't see a difference in the taste of the broccoli, but it's so pretty. Throw it in my Kung Pao or my skillet for whatever the meal is I'm making. My Kung Pao chicken is what I'm talking about. And it's so pretty. It actually is this really beautiful purple when you're picking it in the garden. And as it gets hot in the skillet, it turns almost black. It's really cool. And the third thing, so I think I'm going to be planting purple broccoli the rest of my life. The third thing is popcorn. Have you ever considered growing popcorn? Do you love that as a snack like I do? I love it as a snack. I probably have it 4 or 5 times a week. It's a good healthy snack and it's just so enjoyable for me. And I love the different toppings I can put on it. But I never thought of growing it myself. I had had such bad experiences with the different varieties of corn on the cob that I was trying to grow once we moved to New England. In Delaware, when I gardened for a couple decades there, I had no problem whatsoever. I always grew Silver Queen, loved it. It's such a good corn, never had any problems. But it's just not a long enough growing season up here. So I learned after a couple years of trying Silver Queen that I had to stop that. It wasn't going to work. And I tried a different variety every year to no avail. If any of you know a short growing season, really delicious corn on the cob, let me know. I don't like them when they're tough, and I don't like the hard shells. I really like the Silver Queen, that it's a very young, delicate kind of kernel. I know what I mean. And they're a white corn, not a yellow. Anyway, if you have one to recommend, let me know because I'm always eager to try a new one. But I finally gave up on corn. I said, forget it. It's not working. And I realized, ooh, maybe I could try popcorn. And sure enough, the popcorn, I've had a couple different varieties now, does really well. And I also was experimenting with milling my own flour back when I started growing popcorn. And I realized I could also mill the popcorn like cornmeal. So it was a double win. And I never would have tried it if I was successful with my corn. Now I kind of wish I could do both, but it's fun growing popcorn. So I'm not complaining. So those are the 3 things I wanted to cover today. Like I said, there's so much we could talk about gardening, and maybe we'll cover some of those other topics I mentioned. As always, reach out to me. Let me know what you'd like to know in future episodes, what you'd like to talk about. And I'm always super happy if you take a second to leave a review over at Apple Podcasts. Go to soulyrested.com/podcast for links and directions on how to do that. And it means the world to me. So thank you. And it also means the world to me if you want to go check out our sponsors. I wouldn't be here if I didn't have these amazing companies wanting to meet you guys. And I love connecting you to these amazing companies that I have vetted, and I only work with ones that I truly love. So it gets me excited when I hear from you guys and you're thankful that I connected you to these companies and you tell me how much you love them too. So all right, that's it for today, guys. Thanks for listening. Remember, it is easy to forget how blessed we are to live this life. So enjoy the simple, everyday efforts. It's not easy, but it's a good life.